The Marvel Cinematic Universe, MCU, has been on a bit of a roller coaster lately. After the grandeur of Avengers, Endgame, and the confusion of Multiverse of Madness, we found ourselves in a bit of a cinematic slump, with some entries being outright forgettable. Enter Captain America, Brave New World, a film that promises a return to a more grounded political thriller-style narrative. And yet, despite its best intentions, it feels more like a series of safe bets rather than a leap forward. This is a movie that was always going to be under intense scrutiny. For the first time, Anthony Mackie takes up the mantle of Captain America on the big screen, and with him comes a hefty expectation to carry on the legacy of Steve Rogers, Chris Evans, while making the role his own. So, how does it fare? Let's break it down. The opening of Brave New World does a decent job of setting up the stakes. Sam Wilson, Mackie, having taken on the Captain America shield in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, is now fully entrenched in the role. The film opens with a secret mission where he, alongside his trusty sidekick Joaquin Torres, Danny Ramirez, embarks on a covert operation to uncover a government conspiracy. The action in these initial moments is solid, if not earth-shattering. The flying sequences are well choreographed, and Sam's skills are finally on full display in his upgraded Falcon suit. It's here that the first of the film's many issues start to show. While these sequences are perfectly watchable, they don't have the punch of previous MCU action beats, such as those in The Winter Soldier or Civil War. The Russo brothers built a reputation for having grounded, realistic, and sharp action. There's none of that here. The choreography is serviceable, but the quick cuts and shaky camera take away from the impact, making the whole thing feel less like a masterclass in superhero combat and more like a typical blockbuster scene. However, the real problem isn't the action. It's the story. The film sets up some intriguing political intrigue, but ultimately fails to make it stick. We're thrust into a conspiracy with world-altering consequences, but the narrative unfolds with all the urgency of a slightly above-average episode of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. That's not to say there aren't decent moments, but the stakes feel muddled and often a bit too familiar. This isn't Captain America, the Winter Soldier, where the tension practically seeps out of every frame. Here, it's all too easy to disengage. Mackie, as always, does his best to bring the emotional weight of the role to life. There's no doubt that he brings sincerity to Sam Wilson's journey, especially in navigating the pressures of stepping into the shoes of a legendary hero. He grapples with the expectations placed upon him, not only by the US government, but by the very legacy of Steve Rogers. We get plenty of moments where Sam reflects on his insecurities, trying to carve out his identity as the new Captain America. Unfortunately, while Mackie's performance is earnest, the writing fails him. The film doesn't give him the material to really shine, and his performance sometimes feels more fitting for a TV show rather than a major MCU movie. There's an absence of the gravitas that we saw with Chris Evans. Sam's struggle with the weight of the shield doesn't land with the same impact as Steve's did. It's as though the film wants to explore deeper themes of legacy and responsibility, but doesn't follow through, leaving the audience with a protagonist who feels somewhat adrift. As much as Mackie puts his heart into the role, it's hard not to feel like Brave New World is, at best, a training wheels movie, a necessary chapter to help Sam become the fully realized Captain America he's meant to be, but not quite the defining moment fans may have hoped for. The casting of Harrison Ford as Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross is, on paper, a stroke of genius. The man is a legend, no doubt about it. In Brave New World, he steps into the shoes of the character previously portrayed by William Hurt, and while he brings a level of gravitas to the role, his performance occasionally feels like he's just showing up for the paycheck. There are moments of intensity, particularly when Ross becomes the Red Hulk, but there are also times when Ford looks a bit tired. As a political figure, he does command the screen, but as the Red Hulk? Well, let's just say the CGI here doesn't do him any favors, and the effect looks more like a video game cutscene than a major cinematic moment. To make matters worse, Ford's character arc feels rushed and somewhat unnecessary. His role in the story is key, but his involvement adds little to the overall narrative. He serves more as a plot device to tie things back to previous MCU films than a fleshed-out character in his own right. Now let's talk about the villains. Brave New World features some pretty significant antagonists, notably Giancarlo Esposito, a man who has practically built a career on playing villains. Unfortunately, he's completely wasted here. Esposito's scenes are so brief and underdeveloped that it's almost criminal. His character is supposed to be a mastermind pulling the strings behind the scenes, but instead, he's left to deliver some generic lines and act menacing without ever feeling truly threatening. The wasted potential here is frustrating. especially knowing how well Esposito can handle complex, compelling antagonists. The real issue is that the villain's plan, the conspiracy that Sam uncovers, is less of a masterstroke and more of a series of barely connected events that ultimately result in a lackluster payoff. The plot often feels convoluted and forced, trying to tie in too many threads from previous MCU films. The Incredible Hulk, Eternals, Falcon, and the Winter Soldier, without ever really making them work together in a meaningful way. The final act is a rush to wrap up loose ends, but without any real emotional investment or dramatic payoff. It's like watching a poorly written episode of a spy drama where the mystery is so obvious that it's impossible to care about the resolution. When it comes to the action, Captain America, Brave New World is serviceable, but nothing to write home about. The flying sequences featuring Sam are fun, but the film leans too heavily on shaky cam and quick cuts, which diminish the impact of what could be thrilling combat. The final battle, which should have been a grand culmination of everything that came before it, feels flat and unmemorable. The CGI used to create Red Hulk is another unfortunate misstep. What should have been a powerful moment of transformation instead looks like something out of a Saturday morning cartoon. It's clear that the MCU is no longer the juggernaut it once was, and the lack of creative ambition in Brave New World reflects that. The film feels like a half-hearted attempt to revitalize interest in the franchise, but it fails to deliver the excitement and innovation that made the MCU's earlier phases so electrifying. The VFX are fine, but they don't elevate the film in any way. And without any truly memorable action sequences or strong emotional beats, the film simply feels forgettable. Ultimately, Captain America, Brave New World is an MCU film that plays it safe, perhaps too safe. It doesn't try to reinvent the wheel, and in doing so, it fails to capture the magic that made the earlier Captain America films, particularly The Winter Soldier, stand out as some of the best in the MCU. There are decent performances here, particularly from Mackie and Ford, but they're hampered by a weak script, lackluster action, and a story that never quite delivers on its promise. In a franchise that's currently trying to rebuild after a series of missteps, this movie feels more like a filler episode than a major installment. It's a necessary stepping stone for Sam Wilson's evolution as Captain America, but it doesn't have the same emotional or narrative heft that fans might have hoped for. If you're a diehard MCU fan, there's enough here to keep you entertained, but don't expect to be wowed. As for the rest of us, well, you can probably skip this one and wait for the next big thing. Brave New World represents a wounded MCU, trying to rebuild, but struggling to remember what made it great in the first place. Rating: 6 out of 10. A decent but forgettable entry in a once thriving franchise.